The afternoon sun was bright, but something about the quiet street felt strange. Too still, too calm, almost like it was holding its breath. When the glossy black car rolled to a stop at the gate, no one expected it. The neighbors didn't even look up from their routines. They had no idea that the man stepping out, the man in the crisp suit with silver hair and sharp eyes, was a millionaire who owned the entire property behind those gates. And they definitely didn't know he had arrived unannounced, without a single warning, not even to the staff who worked for him. He wasn't expected home for another 2 months. Yet here he was, standing silently under the warm daylight, staring at his own mansion as if he was a visitor instead of the owner. His name was Marcus Hale, a man known for discipline, elegance, and showing up exactly when he said he would. People described him as predictable, a man who lived by schedules and routines. But today, something had pushed him to return early, something he had sensed in the tone of a recent call, something that didn't feel right. He told no one he was coming. Not his manager, not his housekeepers, not even the private chef who usually had his lunch prepared to perfection. Marcus wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. And that truth, whatever it was, seemed to be hiding behind those tall wooden doors. He pushed the gate open quietly and walked down the stone path. Every sound felt louder than usual. The crunch of leaves under his shoes, the sough from the fountain, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog. As he reached the entrance, he noticed something unusual. The door wasn't locked. It was slightly open, just enough to create a thin line of darkness between the frame and the wood. Marcus frowned. His staff always kept the door closed during lunchtime. Always. He stepped inside, expecting the usual scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. But instead, something else hit him. The air felt warm, almost heavy, as if the house had been filled with movement just seconds before he arrived. His eyes scanned the hallway, searching for signs of life. No footsteps, no voices, no one rushing to greet him. It was strange, too strange for a mansion that typically buzzed with activity. Marcus loosened his ties slightly and walked deeper into the house, his heartbeat picking up. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he kept going, each step slower than the last. He turned the corner toward the dining area, expecting to find the chef preparing lunch or the housekeeper setting the table. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. There, through the half-open doorway, he saw movement. Not just one person, several. They were gathered around the table, their backs toward him, whispering. Something was laid out on the table, something he couldn't fully see from where he stood. And then he noticed what made his stomach twist. None of those people were supposed to be in his house. He took one silent step closer, and that's when the whisper stopped completely. Every head turned toward him at once, and the sight that met his eyes was something he never imagined. For a moment, Marcus didn't move. Neither did the strangers standing around his dining table. Their eyes stayed fixed on him as if they'd been caught doing something they desperately hoped he wouldn't see. The room felt thick with tension, the kind that made even the smallest sound feel like an explosion. Marcus's pulse thudded in his ears. He tried to make sense of what he was looking at, but the scene didn't match anything in his memory or any normal explanation. Who were these people? Why were they in his house? And what were they gathered around so tightly, almost protectively? One of the strangers, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a faint stubble, stepped slightly forward. He didn't look dangerous. In fact, he looked nervous, like someone who wasn't used to standing in expensive houses or facing millionaires who had every right to be furious. But there was something else in the man's expression, something Marcus couldn't name. It wasn't fear of being caught. It was fear of something else entirely. Before Marcus could speak, a soft sound echoed from the table. A small shuffle, a faint exhale. Something, or someone, was under one of the blankets draped across the wooden surface. Marcus felt his breath hitch again. He had expected maybe stolen items, documents, signs of theft or damage. But this felt different. And the way the strangers subtly shifted, blocking his view of whatever was beneath the blanket, only deepened his confusion. He took another step inside, his voice low and steady as he asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing in my home?" No one answered right away. The silence stretched on, too long, too heavy. The woman closest to the table finally lifted her gaze. She looked exhausted, her hair messy, her hands trembling slightly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Something was stopping her. Fear, hesitation, uncertainty. Marcus studied their faces carefully. These were not thieves. They weren't dressed like workers from his staff either. Their clothes were simple, worn, like they had been traveling or moving from place to place without rest. Their shoes carried dust. Their jackets looked creased from long hours. They didn't belong in his polished, controlled world. Yet somehow they were here, inside his mansion, acting as if they had every reason to be. His mind raced back to the moment that had made him change his schedule. That uneasy phone call from his head manager. A strange tone, a few pauses too long, an excuse that didn't sound like an excuse. Marcus now realized that call had been only part of a much bigger puzzle. Something had been happening behind his back. Something important. Something hidden from him on purpose. Another soft sound came from the table, this time clearer. Marcus instinctively moved forward, but the man with stubble raised a hand slightly, not threateningly, just in a quiet plea for him to wait. Marcus stopped, surprised that he listened. The strangers exchanged glances, communicating silently among themselves. Something passed through their expressions. Relief, worry, maybe hope. Whatever it was, it made Marcus feel even more unsettled. These people were connected to something he didn't know about, something bigger than just an unexpected lunch invasion. Finally, the middle-aged man spoke, his voice rough and cautious. "Mr. Hale, we didn't come here to steal anything. We came because we had no other place left to go." Marcus frowned. His world, usually controlled and logical, suddenly felt unpredictable. "Why here?" he asked slowly. "Why my house?" The man hesitated again, then looked toward the blanket on the table. "Because of what? Because of who is underneath this cover?" Before Marcus could respond, a soft cry rose from beneath the blanket. A human cry. Small, fragile, a child. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. But the real shock wasn't the child. It was a look on the strangers' faces, as if the child wasn't just someone they were protecting, but someone Marcus should already know. And that unanswered question hung in the air, tightening the mystery even further. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly as the soft cry echoed through the room. The sound didn't match anything he had prepared himself for. A million possibilities had crossed his mind, but none of them included a child hidden under a blanket in his own dining room. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. The strangers watched him carefully, as if his reaction mattered more than anything else in that moment. The woman with trembling hands placed both palms flat on the table, almost detectively, and Marcus noticed how her eyes softened whenever the blanket moved. Whoever the child was, they cared deeply. The middle-aged man cleared his throat, but Marcus could sense he was choosing his words with painful caution. "We didn't want to involve you," he said quietly, "but circumstances changed. We had no choice." His voice carried a weight Marcus didn't understand. The phrasing didn't feel random. It felt like there was something bigger happening, something the strangers weren't sure he was ready to hear. Marcus stepped closer, but his movement stayed slow, controlled. He didn't want to scare anyone, especially not the child. When he reached the edge of the table, he finally saw it, a small hand, pale and delicate, peeking out from under the blanket. His heart clenched unexpectedly. He wasn't a man known for emotional reactions, yet something about that tiny hand, so still, so fragile, hit him harder than he expected. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. "Who is this child?" Again, silence. The woman exchanged a tense glance with the others. This wasn't hesitation anymore. It was conflict. They were hiding something. Something they feared would change everything once revealed. At that moment, Marcus heard footsteps behind him. Light, quick steps. He turned sharply to see one of his staff, Liam, the young groundsman, standing in the doorway, his face pale and eyes wide. Liam froze when he saw Marcus, then shifted nervously, glancing at the strangers. Marcus's stomach tightened. He could see the fear in the boy's eyes. Not fear of Marcus, but fear of what Marcus was about to discover. "You knew?" Marcus said quietly, locking eyes with him. "You let them in." Liam swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, it's not what you think." "Then explain it." Marcus pressed, keeping his voice even. "Explain why strangers are in my house. Explain why there's a child on my table." Liam's jaw tightened, and he let out a breath as if he'd been holding it for hours. "They came here because they believed you were the only one who could help," he said. "They've been looking for you for weeks." Marcus felt a strange chill move up his spine. Help with what? The man with stubble stepped forward again. "With the truth," he said. "The truth about this child. The truth about what was kept from you." His voice dropped even lower. "And the truth about the people who don't want you to know." Marcus's mind raced. His life had always been built on structure, control, certainty. But each passing second made it clear that something had been happening behind his back for far longer than he realized. He glanced at Liam again, and the young man's expression confirmed it. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was part of something deliberate. Marcus looked back toward the small, still hand on a blanket, and unexpected fear gripped him. Not fear of the strangers. Not fear of being in danger. A deeper fear. Fear that his entire understanding of his own life was about to change. Before he could ask anything else, the child shifted, and a soft whimper rose into the tense silence. The woman lifted the blanket, just enough to reveal a faint glimpse of the child's face. And Marcus's world stopped, because the child didn't just look familiar. The child looked exactly like someone he once knew, and that impossible resemblance raised 100 questions that none of them seemed ready to answer. Marcus stared at the child's face, his breath catching in his chest. The resemblance was undeniable. Too strong, too precise to be coincidence. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyebrows, even the faint tilt of the nose. Every feature struck a memory he had buried years ago, a memory he thought was gone forever. His heartbeat quickened, pounding against his ribs as he tried to steady himself. He wanted to speak, but the words dissolved before they reached his lips. The woman quickly lowered the blanket again, hiding the child from view as if she feared Marcus's reaction. The strangers shifted around her, forming a quiet, protective circle. Their bodies weren't tense like people expecting anger. They were tense like people expecting danger from something far beyond this house. Marcus sensed it, the unspoken fear lingering in their eyes. This wasn't just about a child in need. This was about something bigger, something that had been moving in shadows long before he arrived. Liam stepped inside a little more, closing the door behind him as if he were afraid someone else might appear. Marcus noticed the way the young man kept looking toward the windows, checking angles, checking corners. His breaths were shallow, uncertain. That detail alone made Marcus's stomach tighten. If Liam, the calmest, most steady worker he had, was this afraid, something serious was happening. Marcus forced his voice out, quiet but firm. "Tell me everything. Now!" The room froze again. The middle-aged man's jaw clenched, and he took a shaky breath. He looked like someone carrying a truth, so heavy it was slowly crushing him. "Mr. Hale," he began softly, "the child wasn't brought to you by accident. We've been searching for you for months. But someone has been trying to stop us." His eyes darkened with something that felt like regret. "We lost people on the way here. People who knew the truth." Marcus felt a cold twist in his gut. "What truth?" The man hesitated, then looked directly at him. "That this child has a connection to you. A connection deeper than you realize. And someone didn't want you to know." Marcus's breath hitched. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from a drop he couldn't see the bottom of. The child's faint whimpering echoed again, softer now, almost like a plea. Marcus instinctively moved closer, and this time the woman didn't stop him. He placed a cautious hand on the edge of the blanket, not lifting it, just steadying himself against the table. "What happened?" he whispered. "Who was behind this?" The room shifted with tension. The man opened his mouth, ready to speak, but the sound of something outside cut him off. A car engine. Loud. Close. Too close. Everyone's heads snapped toward the window at the same time. Liam's face drained of all color. The woman clutched the blanket tighter. The man stepped forward, his voice trembling. "They found us." Marcus froze. Who? Before anyone could answer, another sound followed. The sharp slam of a car door, then hurried footsteps approaching the entrance. Heavy, deliberate steps, as if the person outside knew exactly where they were going. The strangers exchanged panicked looks. Liam backed away from the window, breathing fast. The footsteps reached the porch. Marcus's mind raced. Whoever was outside wasn't a guest. They weren't a friend. Something in the weight of the steps made that clear. The handle of the front door rattled once, twice. Then the door began to open without permission, slow and steady. Marcus stepped instinctively in front of the table, blocking the child from view just as the door creaked wider. A shadow filled the entrance, tall, solid, and unmistakably intentional. And in that chilling second, Marcus understood something with absolute clarity. Whatever was coming through that door wasn't here to talk. It was here to take something. Or someone. The door opened wider, and the shadow stepped fully into the light. Marcus's pulse jumped, but he didn't move from his place in front of the table. The figure inside wasn't a stranger at all. It was someone Marcus knew, someone he never expected to see standing unannounced in his home. It was his personal advisor, Grant Mercer, the man who handled his accounts, his appointments, and nearly every detail of his business life. Grant, who was supposed to be out of the country on a corporate trip. Grant, who rarely appeared without calling first. Grant, whose cold expression now carried something Marcus had never seen before, urgency mixed with unmistakable resentment. Grant scanned the room in one sweeping motion, his eyes landing on the strangers, then on the blanket-covered form Marcus stood guarding. His jaw tightened. "So they got here before I did," he said quietly, not bothering to hide the annoyance in his tone. "That complicates things." The strangers stiffened instantly. Liam took a small step backward, as if bracing for something he had feared might happen. The woman moved her hand slightly over the blanket, shielding the child even more. Marcus felt a strange coldness settle in his chest. He couldn't tell if Grant's presence was a relief or a threat, but the tension in the room suggested the latter. Marcus kept his voice even. "You were supposed to be in Switzerland." Grant gave a thin, controlled smile. "Plans change. I heard a rumor you might be coming back early." He stepped further inside, closing the door without taking his eyes off the group. "And I couldn't let you walk into the situation unprepared." The choice of words didn't sit right. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What situation?" Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase. The strangers tensed, but Marcus held up a hand, silently telling them to wait. Grant pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, official-looking, marked with Marcus's company logo. He placed it on the table deliberately, like a card in a game Marcus didn't know he was playing. "You weren't supposed to find out yet," Grant said, his voice lowering. "Not like this." Marcus felt the air tighten around him. "Find out what?" Grant exhaled slowly, almost disappointed. "About the child. About what was kept off the books. About the trust account set up without your knowledge." His eyes flicked toward the strangers. "About the agreement they were never supposed to break." The woman's breath caught sharply. The man clenched his fists. Liam shut his eyes for a brief second, as if realizing everything was about to unravel. Marcus's heartbeat pounded louder. What agreement? Grant didn't blink. The agreement that ensured this child would never come into your life. The agreement that protected your reputation and our company's future. The words struck harder than any physical blow. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. He looked at the strangers, at their exhaustion, their fear, and suddenly it made sense why they had risked everything to come here. They weren't intruders. They were people trapped in something far more complicated than Marcus ever imagined. But before Marcus could process any of it, another sound echoed from outside, a second car, then another door slam, then hurried voices. Not one person. Several. Grant's expression changed instantly from composed to urgent. "We don't have time," he said sharply. "They're coming to take the child away for good." The woman grabbed the blanket tighter. The man stepped protectively closer. Liam's voice shook as he whispered, "They're not supposed to be here this soon." Marcus turned toward the door, hearing the footsteps closing in, fast, coordinated, determined. He didn't know who they were, but every instinct in his body screamed that their arrival would change everything. Grant looked at Marcus with a hard, unreadable expression. You have one chance to choose whose side you're on. Marcus stared back, his mind spinning, his heart racing. But the footsteps reached the front porch before he could speak, and the door handle began to turn again. The handle turned, and for a split second, the entire room held its breath. Marcus stepped forward instinctively, blocking the table with his body. The strangers closed ranks around the child, and Grant stood completely still, his expression unreadable. The front door swung open, but instead of armed men or unknown faces, Marcus's head of security, Rylan, stepped inside. His uniform was neat, his posture rigid, but his eyes widened when he saw the scene. "Sir," Rylan stopped, scanning the room. His gaze moved from Marcus to the strangers, to Grant, and finally to the blanket-covered child. Something shifted in his face. Recognition, regret, then a heavy resignation. "I told them you shouldn't be kept in the dark," he murmured. But no one wanted to listen. Grant's jaw clenched. "Rylan, this doesn't concern you." Rylan looked at him sharply. "It concerns everyone now." Marcus stepped closer, voice low but steady. "Enough. I'm done with half-truths and secrets. Someone tell me the truth about this child." The room went silent, except for the faint sound of the child breathing beneath the blanket. The woman finally lifted the cover gently, revealing the small face clearly. Marcus felt something inside him twist. Memories flooding back of someone he had loved long ago, someone he had lost before they had the chance to build a future. The woman spoke softly. "Her name is Lila, and she's your daughter." The words hit Marcus so hard he had to steady himself against the table. He stared at the child, feeling a rush of emotions, shock, confusion, tenderness, and a deep ache he couldn't name. He remembered Lila's mother, remembered the breakup, the distance, the unanswered calls. But he never knew she'd been pregnant. He never knew he had a child in the world. Marcus looked at Grant, voice tightening. "You knew." Grant didn't deny it. The company board thought revealing a child born outside your public image would cause complications. They made arrangements. When her mother passed, they handled things quietly. Marcus's stomach twisted. Handled. The word felt poisonous. She's a human being. A child. My child. Grant's expression hardened. "And we protected your reputation. Everything you've built." Marcus shook his head slowly, disbelief turning into anger. At the cost of her life? Her safety? Her future? The strangers finally stepped forward, the middle-aged man speaking with raw honesty. "We couldn't keep her hidden anymore. When we realized she wasn't safe in the system they put her in, we ran. We brought her here because she deserves to know her father." Rylan nodded. "And because certain people wanted to move her out of the country. Permanently." Marcus felt something inside him snap into clarity. He stepped toward the child, gently touching her small hand. She curled her fingers around his instinctively, and the entire room felt different, grounded, real. For the first time since he walked in, Marcus knew what he had to do. He faced Grant. "I'm claiming her. Today. Legally and publicly." Grant's eyes widened. "You'll destroy everything you've built." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'll rebuild it with the truth." The strangers exhaled in relief. Rylan stepped closer, offering quiet support. Even the child seemed calmer, as if sensing a shift in the air. But just as the tension began to ease, Grant's expression changed. He reached slowly into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for another envelope. He placed it on the table beside the first. "You think you know the whole truth," he said softly. "But this is the part no one wanted to mention." Marcus opened the envelope. Inside lay legal documents, birth records, guardianship paperwork, and one more sheet that made his breath stop entirely. Another child, a twin, missing. The room went still once more, tension snapping back like a tightened wire. Marcus stared at the document, heart pounding as a new, darker reality settled in. The story wasn't over. The real search had just begun. Marcus stood frozen with the papers in his hands. feeling the weight of everything that had been hidden from him. The revelation of a missing twin shook him deeply, but unlike before, he no longer felt paralyzed. He felt grounded by the small hand holding his finger, by the quiet breathing of the daughter he didn't know he had, and by the sudden certainty that he would not let any more secrets define their lives. The strangers watched him carefully, waiting for his reaction, but Marcus only exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs like a long-held burden finally released. Grant's expression softened, the confident mask slipping away. The board believed it was best to separate them, he explained quietly. One child with caregivers, the other placed into a different program. They thought dividing them meant less risk of the truth coming out. Marcus looked up, his voice steady now. Where's the other child? Grant shook his head. I don't know anymore. The trail was buried. But we can find it if we start from the beginning. Ryland stepped closer. We can use the security archives and old travelogues. There will be traces. There always are. It won't be quick, but it's possible. The strangers nodded, relief softening their tired expressions. The woman placed a gentle hand on Marcus's arm. You're not alone in this. We'll help you find the twin. But first, Lila needs stability. She needs her father. Marcus looked down at the little girl, and for the first time, he truly allowed himself to feel everything: responsibility, fear, love, and hope all at once. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, sleepy and unsure, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned toward him, and that single small movement changed everything. We'll find your sibling, he whispered softly, more to himself than to her. And no one will ever hide you again. Grant watched them with a conflicted expression. Marcus knew there would be consequences, public questions, pressure from the company, and a long process ahead. But none of that mattered now. Losing everything didn't scare him anymore. What scared him was the idea of losing another moment with a child he almost never met. Over the next few hours, they worked together. Ryland contacted trusted sources. The strangers provided all the documents they had. Grant gave what information he could and agreed to testify, if needed. By evening, the house felt different, less like a battlefield, and more like a place of beginnings. The fear that had filled every corner slowly lifted, replaced by determination. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the dining room, Marcus held Lila in his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder, small and warm, trusting him completely. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. There were still challenges ahead. There was still a missing child to find. But Marcus knew this was a moment everything changed. He wasn't just a millionaire or a businessman or a public figure. He was a father, and that new identity mattered more than any reputation or company name. As the house settled into quiet, Marcus whispered to Lila, "Thank you for finding your way back to me." And even though she didn't understand the words, she held on to him a little tighter, as if answering him in her own small way. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, Marcus wasn't walking alone, and that made all the difference.